After 3 nights of heavy combat, 29th Brigade is in motion. A retrograde movement is underway as the entire brigade pulls back to Line Golden, the next defensive position south of here. The Imjin mist has lifted. It's a bright spring day. Men are moving down in formation from the hillsides. Royal Ulster Rifles here, Royal Northumberland Fusiliers there, into the valley floor and starting to march south, shouldering their weapons. Various vehicles are dotted along the road, along the valley floor. Ambulance jeeps are loading the wounded. Trucks and jeeps are loading ammunition. And dotted along the valley are the 18 Centurion tanks of the 8th Hussars. And they're spreading out as much as possible, rotating their turrets to aim at the hilltops to cover the infantry as they move south. And just up valley is the Centurion of John Preston Bell, one of the youngest of the Hussar officers. And that morning he was down beside his tank with a mechanic fixing a track. He had a sloppy track. And as he was doing this, they finished the job, and John said to the corporal in the driver's seat, "Corporal, start her up." "Corporal, start her up." No response. He looks up at the corporal, and the corporal is just gazing open-mouthed up at the ridgeline. So John said, I followed his gaze, and what I saw astonished me, because across this entire ridgeline down valley, figures were starting to appear on the skyline, completely open sight. 1, 2, 5, 10, 50, 100, countless. And this, of course, was the Chinese. They'd seen the British vacating their positions, and they'd moved forward up onto the ridge where they could look down at the British in their retreat. The Chinese, they'd been fighting this entire battle at night because they were so concerned about US tactical air. But they realize now that if they can charge down from the ridge into the valley and literally grab the enemy by his belt buckle, the British firepower and air power will be negated. And this is exactly what happens. A roar goes up that resounds down the valley. Shah, Shah, Shah. Kill, 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 which was the Chinese war cry. And then this mass of men surges down the hillsides among the British. And what had been a defensive battle now becomes a desperate melee combat. Close range fights, small groups of men fighting down valley, trying to get away from the Chinese. Hand grenades, bayonets, even fists are being used. Vehicles are being overrun. Complete chaos, complete melee. And in the midst of this one position is the last brigade position holding out. This, as you can see, is in a saddle in the road, a saddle in Route 11. And the units here from the Royal Ulster Rifles are trying to cover the men as they fight south to get out of this, what is now a death trap. And amid this chaos, Colonel Kingsley Foster, the commanding officer of the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, arrives in his jeep. And Foster was a rather remarkable figure, a very avuncular figure. He had commanded the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers as his father had before him. It was the family regiment. He was an extremely well-to-do aristocratic officer. During World War II, he had served on the staff, and so when Korea came up, he volunteered to lead his battalion in battle because he'd seen no action. And in Korea, he had a reputation of always being in the thick of combat, which is not always the ideal position for a commanding officer. He was also an extremely kind and gentle man. Everybody called him Kingsley, which is very unusual for a commanding officer. Some of his last letters to his wife were planning his retirement, and he was hoping that some of the men in his unit would come and work with him on his estate. And a wonderful story is told by the Korean porters who were assigned to the battalions usually older men who couldn't fight in combat and were used for carrying heavy loads around the battalion area. And these men generally weren't treated terribly well, they weren't greatly respected. And when the Korean porters were assigned to the Fusiliers, they were paraded, and Kingsley Foster went up to each of the men, shook his hand and gave them a Fusilier's cap badge and welcomed them to his battalion. And the following day, a delegation of these older Korean men came up to him in his tent and said to him through his translator, "Colonel Foster, we want to tell you that if you decide to run for the presidency of South Korea, we will all vote for you." So this was the kind of man who arrives in the midst of this chaos at this position. He says to the Royal Ulster Rifles company commander, "Do you have any wounded men?" He says, "Yes, sir, we do." He says, "Load them into my jeep." The RUR officer says, "Sir, you can't drive down the valley. The Chinese have moved behind us." Because, of course, the Chinese are using human wave tactics. A mass frontal attack goes in, and at the same time, infiltration units move deep behind the UNC unit and set up ambushes in their rear. As one of the Royal Ulster Rifles, Josie Farrell, said, "You don't fight the Chinaman once, you have to fight through him again and again." And this is what had happened here. But Foster says, "Load the wounded." Wounded men are loaded into the jeep. Kingsley Foster races off south. And about 200 or 300 meters down this road, which was a dirt track back in the day, there was a stream running across the road. As Foster's jeep enters the stream, his engine conks out. He jumps out of the jeep, moving to lift up the bonnet, and a Chinese machine gun spots him, fires a burst. Kingsley Foster, hit, falls down, face down into the stream. Commanding officer of the RNF has been killed in battle. Call goes out over the radio. Sunray is down. The commanding officer of the RNF, killed in battle, leaves his battalion leaderless to fight its way through this funnel of fire. That concludes this stand. Our next stand is on the same position. Stay with us.